I'm Chris Walker, Executive Director of the International Forum for Democratic Studies at the National Endowment for Democracy, here today with a new installment of Democracy Ideas. I'm delighted to have with me today Marc Plattner to discuss his new article, Reflections on Governance, from the October 2013 issue of the Journal of Democracy. Marc, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Chris. Pleasure to be here with you.
You've done a very thorough examination of the evolution of the term governance. What were the main features of the term and the changes it's undergone that you saw during the course of your research?
Well, the article began as a talk that I was invited to give at the Institute for Political Studies of the Catholic University in Portugal. The conference was held in Estoril, Portugal, and the title was Governance, Leadership, and Democracy, which is also the title of a new master's program that the Institute has begun. And I began to reflect on the fact that the word used was governance rather than government, and that this was a term that more and more frequently I saw being employed in discussions about development or democracy. And so I did a little bit of research to find out when and why the term governance had begun to displace the older term government. For the most part, these two terms were pretty much interchangeable throughout most of modern history, although the term government was used very much more often. Governance was a kind of rare and unusual term. But that all began to change about 25 years ago. And it's complicated to try and figure out why that happened, but one key development was that the World Bank published a report entitled Governance and Development in 1992 that had a big influence. And the World Bank, I think, adopted the term governance rather than government because its charter prohibited it from intervening in political affairs. It required it to remain focused on the economic realm. And I think it found in the term governance a word that seemed less political than government did. And then I found a whole host of articles by scholars from a wide range of disciplines and perspectives making the argument that governance was something different than government, that it didn't mean the same thing. Instead, it was a broader or wider term that focused not just on the political side, what the state did, which is what these people said government should be restricted to, but it also included the activity of civil society, of market forces, so on, insofar as they became involved in the wider task of governance. And I'd say, so that was the intention with which the displacement of government by governance began, but then as the term governance became more popular and widely used, it began to be used as a substitute for government even by people who didn't intend that specific meaning. And so even people who are focusing on the role of the state, the political side of governance, of government, began to use the term governance instead. One example of that is Francis Fukuyama's book, I think it was published in 2004, on state building, the subtitle of which was Governance and World Order.
And given the prominence that the term governance has achieved over the last quarter century and the way in which many different audiences project their own definition onto it, what do you see as the main pitfalls of divergent interpretations of the term governance today?
Well, the first thing I would say is that good governance and democracy are different things. Often they go together. In fact, in most cases in the world today, those states that are well governed, that score highly on governance indicators, such as the World Bank has 6 indicators, are also democracies. But it's by no means an absolute correlation. And there are examples of countries, Singapore is the most well-known, that are not democratic, but do score well on most governance indicators. And conversely, there are some countries that do have democratic political systems, but most people would agree are poorly governed. So there really is, I think, room for serious debate about what should be included in the concept of good governance. Sometimes people see it as the absence of corruption, but it's possible to have a government that's not corrupt and yet is very inefficient. On the other hand, it's possible to have government, as China has over the last 3 decades, that's very effective at increasing economic growth, the security and well-being of much of the population. At the same time, though, being ill-governed in other respects, having high levels of corruption, terrible environmental problems, and so on. So there's room for legitimate argument, I think, about what is the measure of success of a government.
And in your estimation, is it possible to achieve high-quality governance in the absence of democratically accountable institutions?
Well, I think Singapore is an anomaly. It's really the only non-oil-rich state that has an advanced economy and yet is not democratic. But it's unusual in many ways. It's quite a small state. It's really a city-state almost. And it's had extraordinary leadership. The real problem that you have in non-democratic countries, or the first problem I would say you have, is that so much depends on the nature of the ruler. And there are cases, mainly in East Asia, where you have rulers who are dedicated to improving the economic welfare of the people, not simply stealing as much as they can from their time in office. But there's no guarantee under an autocratic system that you will have that kind of leadership. Singapore is one place where you have had it, and so far at least it's been able to preserve relatively good governance, and that's to say governance in the sense of implementing policies well and delivering services well, but that doesn't mean it fosters the kind of society where we would like to live, or where I would like to live in any case. There are obviously very strong limits on individual freedom there that make it a not very attractive place in many ways.
And on the subject of China, in many ways, China's impressive economic growth over the last 3 decades has seemingly led many to conflate China's economic stewardship and growth with good governance. Do you see this in this way?
I think that is true, but I think it's also true that when people look at the other so-called East Asian tigers, Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, that those countries, well, in Taiwan and Korea in particular, at an earlier stage of development were non-democratic, but did have very rapid economic growth. And again, I think people see that as a measure of successful government or governance. On the other hand, in those cases, as they rose to higher levels of economic development, there was a popular demand for greater democracy and individual freedom. And those two countries both have now become democracies. And of course, the big question, I think, for all of us who follow democracy and authoritarianism in the world is what will happen to China as it moves into the higher reaches of development, whether it will be able to maintain its economic growth without also introducing much greater political freedom. I've been very skeptical about how far it can get while remaining undemocratic, but my skepticism is of long standing, and so far China has managed to keep going on the path it's been on. But I do think that and the crunch point is coming soon.
Marc, thanks so much for joining us and talking about your article in the October 2013 issue of the Journal of Democracy.
Thanks, Chris. Glad to do so.